December 26th, 1900. A man climbs treacherous paths cut into vertical cliffs to relieve 3 keepers at the Flannan Lighthouse. Instead, he finds stopped clocks, unmade beds, and a dark beacon. 3 experienced men have vanished from a place where there's nowhere to run and there's no way off the island. I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the In-Between. The Flannan Islands, a group of 7 barren islands, also known as the 7 Hunters, off to a nicely ominous start. About 20 miles west of the outer edge of the Hebrides Archipelago, off the western shores of Scotland. The first stop for winds and waves that have traveled all the way across the Atlantic with nothing in their way and no reason to stop now. The biggest of the 7, Eilean Mor, covering 40 acres, has sheer cliffs around most of her shore. If you're lucky enough to get a boat to a spot where you can get ashore, there's nothing there but great grass for sheep grazing, meaning that if you did choose to live there, you would have to have food shipped out to you on a regular basis. Winds are a constant 15 to 25 miles an hour on a calm day and can gust up to 60 in a storm, which often appear out of nowhere, turning the average 5 to 10 foot waves to 10 to 20 foot swells in the blink of an eye, making those food deliveries that you depend on rather unpredictable. Even those who live anywhere near this place refer to it as the other country. So let's take one of the worst places to live, build a lighthouse there, and add 3 people into an environment where people just aren't meant to be. Nothing can go wrong with that plan, right? Well, that's what the Scottish Northern Lighthouse Board, otherwise known as the NLB, thought. That lighthouse was built and went into operation in December of 1899. Little did the NLB, or anyone else for that matter, realize that this lighthouse would become the center of one of history's most enduring mysteries, the mystery of the disappearance of the Flannan Lighthouse lightkeepers. So what exactly happened on that lonely lighthouse island? For those of you not familiar with the story, on December 15th, 1900, a ship named SS Arctur, sailing from Philadelphia to Leith, passed within 5 miles of Eilean Mor around midnight and noted the lighthouse was dark. Weird. Bad weather keeps any ships from sailing out to check on it, but on December 26th, Joseph Moore, another lighthouse keeper, gets out there to find out what's going on. Once he gets on the island, he discovers that the 3 lighthouse keepers stationed on the island, James Ducat, age 43, Thomas Marshall, age 29, and Donald MacArthur, age 40, are gone. The lighthouse is deserted. The gate and doors are closed, beds unmade, clocks stopped, and the kitchen is eerily tidy with a half-eaten meal on the table and an overturned chair, suggesting the keepers left in a hurry. Moore checks the daily log, something that is written in every day. An entry from December 12th read, "Gale north by northwest. Sea lashed to a fury. Stormbound. 9 p.m. Never seen such a storm. Everything shipshape. Ducat, irritable. 12 p.m. Storm still raging. Wind steady. Stormbound. Cannot go out. Ship passed sounding foghorn. Could see the lights of cabins. Ducat, quiet. MacArthur, crying." The December 13th entry read, "Storm continued through the night. Wind shifted west by north. Ducat, quiet. MacArthur, praying. 12 noon, gray daylight. Me, Ducat, and MacArthur prayed." The final entry, allegedly made on December 15th, read, 1 p.m., storm ended. Sea is calm. God is over all. That doesn't sound good. But he finds the lighthouse itself in perfect working order. It's just not on. Moore enlists a couple of the other people to stay on the island with him to help him get the lighthouse running again. The next day, he and one of his men searched the rest of the island. The west landing showed storm damage, bent railings, a missing storage box at 110 feet up with the ropes that had been inside strewn all over the place, and a rock weighing over a ton had been moved from the spot it had always sat, leading to theories that a giant wave swept the keepers away while securing equipment. Well, isn't that all wrapped up in a neat little bow? Too neat, because if you look at the details and separate fact from legend, that bow unravels pretty fast. However, at this moment, I'm going to have to warn you all to put on either your big girl pants or your big boy pants, because I have some bad news. All of that really juicy stuff about the half-eaten meal and the chair knocked over, the storm so bad that it made the tough, seasoned lighthouse keepers cry. Fake! The stuff about the meal half-eaten and the chair comes from a poem called Flannan Isles by Wilfred Wilson Gibson.
Yet as we crowded through the door, we only saw a table spread for dinner, meat and cheese and bread, but all untouched, and no one there. As though, when they sat down to eat, ere they could even taste, alarm had come, and they in haste had risen, and left the bread and meat. For at the table head a chair lay tumbled on the floor.
And the part about the log entries and the lightkeepers crying, that was added by the pulp magazine True Story, known for using the word true very liberally. One reason we know it's fake, beside the fact that the magazine that printed it is known for lying, is that we know that log entries are only written by the primary lighthouse keeper, in this case, James Ducat. But the log entries printed by True Stories magazine are supposedly written by Thomas Marshall, the assistant lighthouse keeper. That would never happen. Not to mention the fact that the logbook is like the official documentation. So it was not like a place to write down how everyone's feeling, like a lighthouse diary with a rainbow unicorn on the front and a little gold lock. But as sad as it is to say goodbye to the well-known creepy bits, we have some more in store. And when we look at what we know to be the real facts, the mystery is still there. So let's go back to the beginning and see what really happened. Fun fact! Well, not really fun, but the reason that lighthouses always had a crew of 3 men is because of the Smalls Lighthouse Incident of 1801. In the winter of 1800-1801, the Smalls Lighthouse, located on a remote reef off of the Pembrokeshire coast in Wales, became the site of a tragic incident when one of its 2 keepers, Thomas Howell, died, likely of natural causes. The other lighthouse keeper, Thomas Griffith, freaks out, thinking that he's going to be accused of murder. So he somehow preserves Howell's body in a makeshift coffin and lashes it to the lighthouse railings, enduring severe isolation and psychological torture until relief boats get there, which, because of terrible weather and such, turns out to be about 4 months later. Griffith probably did the right thing because he's never accused of murder or anything, but the ordeal leaves him traumatized and never really quite the same. So, new lighthouse rule, groups of 3 or sometimes 4 operators at all times. Construction on the Eilean Mor Lighthouse began in 1895. The conditions on the island were so rough that it took them 4 years to get it done, with the lighthouse going into service on December 7th, 1899. And I hear you barking, big dog. If the environment there is so harsh, why build there at all? Well, what's the point of having a lighthouse in the easy places? The best place to put a lighthouse is in the hard places to keep ships from crashing. And Eilean Mor fit that bill to a T. Amazingly enough, the lighthouse is not even the first construction project on that island. To this day, there are ruins called the Chapel, rumored to have been built by St. Flannan, a 7th century Irish priest whom the islands are named after. The lighthouse stands 75 feet tall and is built at the highest point on the island at 285 feet above sea level. She is state of the art for the day, with a 140,000 candle power beacon pumping out light that can be seen for 24 nautical miles. 2 landing stages are built, one on the east and one on the west, with zigzag staircases cut into the cliffs and a trolley tramway to transport supplies from the ships up to the lighthouse. A shore station is established on Breescliff on the nearby island of Lewis for keepers' families since they can't stay on the island. The Eilean Mor Lighthouse actually had a crew of 4. 3 men at a time with each man rotating 6 weeks on and 2 weeks off. Unfortunately, that was best case scenario since getting a boat out there was totally weather dependent. When they were on, they worked in 4-hour shifts, maintaining the light's signature flash using lenses rotating in mercury. Duties include refilling oil lamps, cleaning lenses, and logging weather, sea conditions, and passing ships. Fun fact! Every lighthouse has a unique rotation timing and flash pattern so sailors can identify which one they are seeing. Huh! Okay, so we've got ourselves a well-oiled machine here. What's the first thing that happens? They're not even up and running for a month when a rogue storm wave destroys both of their cranes they had positioned at 70 feet and 120 feet above sea level. And if that 120 feet number doesn't impress you, it should. The largest wave on record is from the Lituya Bay mega tsunami in Alaska on July 9, 1958. That wave reached an inland height of 1,720 feet as the gigantic wave created by an 8.3 magnitude earthquake pushed its way into a narrow, steep-sided fjord. However, that means for our purposes, this one doesn't count. That 1,720 is not the wave height at sea, making it different from open ocean rogue waves. The tallest officially measured wave was at Nazaré, Portugal on October 29, 2020. That was only 101 feet. So a wave big enough to take out equipment at 120 feet? That's a big boy. But let's hold on to that information for a tick and fast forward a year to December of 1900. So the crew at Eilean Mor at the time is James Ducat, who, like I mentioned before, is the primary lighthouse keeper, or PLK, with 22 years of experience. Thomas Marshall, assistant lighthouse keeper, or ALK, with 4 years of experience, and Donald MacArthur, occasional lighthouse keeper, or OLK. Donald only has about a year of experience because he's not a full-time light keeper like the other guys. He's actually a tailor. He's just filling in for their regular third guy, William Ross, who broke his arm in an accident with the trolley they used to get supplies from the bottom of the cliffs up to the lighthouse. Donald has actually been on the island since October and is getting anxious to get back home. He's just not used to this whole lighthouse life thing. On December 7th, the men get a visit from John Muirhead, the superintendent of the NLB, possibly to address tensions among the keepers, and assures MacArthur that he'll be relieved by December 20th. As he's getting ready to go, Muirhead shakes hands with Ducat and Marshall on the east landing and looks up to see MacArthur manning the lighthouse, unaware that he would be the last to see them alive. Now, before we get to the next stop on our timeline of events, we have to pause for just a moment and chat about the standard emergency procedures for lighthouses. And if you have a beef with your current 911 emergency response time, pay attention. At this point, 1900, lighthouses did not have radio communications. Radio is introduced as a maritime solution in 1898, but doesn't roll out as standard equipment for a few years yet. So when William Ross broke his arm in the trolley accident, he lucked out in that the supply ship was still there and could take him back to the mainland right away. For those not so fortunate, the call for help at the time was to hang a big colored ball or disc out from the rails of the lighthouse and wait for someone on land to see your distress call. So the NLB employed a guy named Roderick Mackenzie, a gamekeeper on the island of Lewis, to monitor the lighthouse. So every day, he would take his telescope and draw a bead on the lighthouse, looking for the colored ball waving in the wind. If he does see one, then he has to send a telegram to the NLB to let them know, and the NLB then has to scramble to try to find a ship that can head out there to see what's going on. That's a process that can take days, maybe even weeks. So Roderick goes outside with his telescope on December 7th and doesn't see a light. He doesn't see a light again until a brief glimpse on December 12th, and then doesn't see it again after that. I know that sounds really bad, but remember that he is also dealing with fog that can sometimes block his view. But he just assumes all is good because he is told to report when he sees the colored distress beacon flying, not instances of missing light. Okay, seems to me maybe that procedure wasn't really thought through. The night of December 15th, Captain Holman of the SS Arctur, sailing from Philadelphia to Leith, a port in Edinburgh, passed within 5 miles of Eilean Mor around midnight and noted the lighthouse was dark. That's weird. He immediately makes a note to report the outage when he gets to Leith. Unfortunately for the lighthouse guys, Captain Holman's boat hits a rock in the Firth of Forth. That's just fun to say. On December 17th, adding another day before he can reach port. When the SS Arctur finally drags itself to dock, Captain Holman reports the dark lighthouse right away to the owner of the boat, which is running it up the chain of command. However, maybe because it's the holidays, or maybe because the boat owners are too busy trying to figure out how to fix the huge hole in their boat, I don't know, but the boat owners don't relay the message to the NLB until December 28th, which, as it turns out, is too little too late. On December 20th, the day that John Muirhead promised he would have a relief person to tag out Donald from the lighthouse rotation, a hurricane-force storm hits the area, grounding everyone. They don't actually get going for another 6 days. But the 26th is a fair day, and Captain Harvey navigates the boat, the Hesperus, toward the lighthouse with relief keeper Joseph Moore and supplies on board. As they get close to the island, they see no flag is raised. Odd. That's the customary thing to do when the keepers see a ship coming in. But worse yet, no keepers greet the ship, and no provision boxes are out. Captain Harvey sounds the foghorn and fires a signal rocket, but gets zero response. Now, there is literally no place for a ship to actually dock on Eilean Mor. So Moore and some crewman named McCormick, I bet he was wearing a red shirt, have to get in a rowboat and row to the east landing. McCormick stays with the rowboat as Moore climbs up to the lighthouse. He finds the entrance gate and main door closed. The kitchen door is open, the fireplace is cold. The beds are unmade and the clocks are stopped, which is not necessarily unusual. All clocks needed to be wound every day to keep them working back then, but it does tell Moore that the men have been gone for more than a day. But the lamps are filled, lenses polished, and blinds are drawn, as is daylight protocol. There is no half-eaten meal or overturned chair, contrary to later embellishments. Moore goes running back to the boat, tells Captain Harvey about the missing men, and grabs 3 more crew members to stay with him and help him relight and man the lighthouse, while Captain Harvey returns to Breezecliff to relay the news. At 7:14 p.m., Harvey sends a telegram to the NLB.
Dreadful accident has happened at the Flannens. The 3 keepers, Duckett, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. The clocks were stopped, and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows. They must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane or something like that.
The next day, Moore does a proper search of the rest of the island, looking for any kind of clues as to where the lightkeepers went. They came in on the east landing, so they knew nothing was out of the ordinary there. But the west landing was a different story. A storage box at 110 feet above sea level is missing. Mooring ropes that were inside are all over the place. Iron railings are bent or broken, and a life buoy is torn off. A rock over 1 ton is dislodged from its usual spot high on the cliff, and grass on the top of the cliff is scoured away at some points. Moore takes a look at the logbook. The last official entry is December 13th. However, it was common for the PLK to make notes on a chalkboard for a day or 2 at a time before transferring those notes into the official log. The chalkboard contained notes for both December 14th and 15th. On the 15th, the men recorded that they put out the light at 9 a.m., recorded the barometer and thermometer readings, and noted everything as being normal. The afternoon of the 15th, a storm rolls in with gale force winds of force 8, which is wind speeds up to 46 miles an hour. By 6 p.m. that day, the winds had increased to force 9, which is 54 miles per hour. That's not great, but it's certainly not a storm that these guys haven't been through 100 times before. The next day, so the 28th, NLB Superintendent Robert Muirhead arrives to investigate for himself. He sees the same west landing damage, the dislodged rock, the torn life buoy, and says, "Yep, they must have been swept away by a wave." But we'll talk more about that conclusion in a minute. Joseph Moore stayed on the island for a few months until new keepers could be found and trained. And the whole time he's there, he can't stop thinking about two things. Number one, what happened to those guys? Number two, why didn't I bring my good luck charm that I bring everywhere? Joseph finally did get replaced, but for the rest of his life, he felt like because he didn't have his good luck charm with him while he was there, that he carried some bad mojo back with him, experiencing bad luck from then on. So what happened to these guys? Obviously, there's no shortage of theories on this one. The most logical one and the most widely accepted is the wave theory put forward by the NLB guy, Muirhead. The 120-foot wave from the year before is certainly proof of concept that these rogue waves do exist, and sometimes bigger than we can imagine. The men each had an oilskin coat, which is a coat made from cotton material soaked in linseed oil and wax to make it waterproof. Standard lightkeeper issue. But Moore's investigation noted that only 2 of the 3 coats were missing from the wreck. MacArthur's was still there. Now keep in mind that lighthouse protocol called for 1 person to remain inside the lighthouse at all times. The theory is that the other 2 men went outside in the storm to take care of some equipment. Seems funny, but less than a year earlier, Ducat was reprimanded for damage that occurred to one of the cranes while Marshall was operating it. He was warned by the NLB that any further damage could result in either a fine or losing his job. That may have been the reason for going outside at a time when no one should have been going outside. The theory goes on to say that MacArthur must have been up in the tower, sees the wave coming and runs out to warn the other 2, but is too late and gets swept away as well. Between the wrecked railing and shifted boulder, among other things, there certainly is evidence for a large wave hitting the island. The problem that I have with this is that Moore found the gate and the front door closed. If you're sprinting out of the house to try to save your friends, are you going to stop and close the doors behind you? Not to mention that the storm that was recorded as hitting them on the 15th was bad, but not off the charts bad. The storm that hit 5 days later on the 20th with hurricane force winds was far more likely to have caused that damage. So, in reality, there's no way that anyone can say for sure that the damage happened on the 15th. It most likely did not. And these guys were professional. It's highly unlikely that any of them would have ignored the protocol to stay in the lighthouse. The next theory is that someone went nuts. If you're familiar with the phrase "mad as a hatter" from Alice in Wonderland, it comes from real life. Back in the day, the hat-making process used mercury to make and stiffen the felt. Prolonged exposure to the mercury nitrate solution made the hatter go nuts. Well, in the lighthouse business, when you needed that lens to keep spinning at a smooth, regular rate, the best way to do that was to float the lens on a bed of mercury. So it certainly is not out of the realm of possibility that MacArthur somehow got an overdose of mercury and went nuts. Or maybe he just couldn't handle his unexpected overtime, since this was not really his jam. He wasn't made for this job like the other guys were. And go nuts on the job as a lightkeeper isn't unprecedented. In August of 1960, assistant lighthouse keeper Robert Dixon murdered relief keeper Hugh Clark with a .22 rifle on Little Ross Island. Robert's lawyer said Robert just snapped, likely due to mental strain from the isolated high-pressure environment. It's a very isolated, lonely existence out there. Maybe MacArthur just wasn't prepared for that. So he snaps and goes running out of the lighthouse without his coat, and the other 2 don their raincoats and go after him, with all 3 being swept away by a rogue wave. Except, again, it's unlikely that the remaining 2 would break the 1 person inside at all times protocol. Or maybe MacArthur went nuts, killed the other 2, tossing their bodies into the sea before throwing himself off the cliff. But if that were the case, you would expect to see some signs of struggle in the tower. The other two certainly would not go down without a fight. But other than unmade beds, the whole place was perfectly neat and tidy. Now, you may say maybe he killed them and then went and tidied up the lighthouse before throwing himself off the cliff. But if you're going to do that, why wouldn't you make the beds as well? On a totally different note, we have the wind vortex theory, the equivalent of the swamp gas theory for disappearing lighthouse keepers. This idea posits that high westerly winds on December 15th, together with the island's unique shape, created a vortex of strong winds, lifting Ducat and Marshall over the 200-foot cliffs as they were outside getting things ready to weather the storm. MacArthur, trying to figure out where they went, goes outside without a coat and is also lifted up and carried away. Sounds crazy, but later keepers actually reported being lifted up by a wind tunnel type current on Eilean Mor. Okay, so strong wind currents are created on the island. But if this is actually a thing, then it should have happened more often. Yes, people were lifted up, but not enough to be thrown off the cliff's edge. The storm they were riding out was not stronger than anything else they'd ever experienced, so it should not have created wind anomalies different than anything else they'd experienced. But I think my favorite theory is that they were raided by pirates.
We shall need a crossbow, an hourglass, 3 goats. One of us must learn to play the trumpet whilst the other one goes like this. I know a man with a goat. Good, I can go like this.
Who killed the light keepers and threw their bodies over the cliff. For what? A couple of weeks worth of rice and flour? It ain't pirates. And keep in mind that as we're going through all of these thrown over the cliff scenarios, that history has shown that bodies from ships that had wrecked in the area most often would show up on a neighboring shore. The sea in this area is not known to keep her dead. But none of the bodies of the 3 light keepers was ever recovered. So, now that we've weeded out all of the mundane, no fun explanations, let's look at some of the more strange ones. Eilean Mor has always been regarded as a magical place, which is why the locals call it the Other Country, believed to be inhabited by fairies, elves, and supernatural entities. In the 16th century, a man named Donald Munro claimed to have found small bones attributed to a race of little people who, legend has it, clashed with early Christian settlers. Maybe that's why St. Flannan didn't stick around to build more than just his little chapel. Local folklore describes Eilean Mor as haunted, with tales of supernatural beings and rituals to appease them. The most prevalent being the Phantom of the 7 Hunters, the nickname of the 7 Flannan Islands, who is said to carry people off of the island to an unknown fate. On the more innocent side of the folklore scale, it is said that the grass on top of the island is magical. Remember when I said that shepherds would take their sheep out there to graze? It's true, although I have no idea how they actually get the sheep on a boat and then land them on an island that has no real landing sites. But they did. The grass was said to cause pregnant sheep to have twins and cure any sheep that was sick. However, they never stayed overnight. That was considered a bad idea that the spirits might construe as disrespectful. Of course, we have the ever-present alien abduction theory. Seriously, this is about the only thing that can account for these 3 men just absolutely vanishing. But as usual, we also have zero evidence that this did occur. They're crafty little suckers. But my favorite legend is that of the Blue Men of Minch. Minch is the waterway separating the Inner Hebrides from the Outer Hebrides Islands. Local folklore tells of blue, human-sized mermen-like creatures that inhabit the water there. But these guys are not like the cute, friendly mermaids. Should your boat be unlucky enough to encounter one or more of these guys, be prepared. They are going to challenge your captain to a rhyming poetry duel. They throw out the first line, and the captain has to rhyme it.
Your face is a wreck. You're a blight on the Norse.
Your face brings to mind the arse end of a horse.
If he fails this oceanic rap battle, The blue man's powerful tail will whip up a frenzy in the water, turbulent enough to sink the ship. Boom! Your boat and everyone on her is gone. So, I guess the theory relating to the lighthouse is that the blue men got a little tired of hanging out in Minch and made their way offshore ways to the lighthouse and started stirring up some trouble while they're away from home.
Don't start nothing. Won't be nothing.
Think about it. What would make that third person leave the lighthouse unless they are witnessing something truly supernatural? But in the end, Aileen Moore Lighthouse continued to operate with her human crew until it was automated in 1971 with no further strangeness reported. Well, mostly, if you don't count the reports of people hearing the names of the three men being spoken on the wind, or the three black birds that Joseph Moore saw flying away from the door of the lighthouse that he swears were the transformed spirits of the three lightkeepers, or the strange knocks that were sometimes heard on the door to the lighthouse with no one standing on her front step. Remember the poem called Flannan Isles by Wilfred Wilson Gibson? I think he sums up the whole affair best.
We seemed to stand for an endless while, though still no word was said. 3 men alive on Flannan Isle, who thought on 3 men dead.
If you'd like to continue to the next stop on this paranormal train ride, click right here. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.